Good morning. John Adamson of Seeking Light. Hope you're doing well on this wet Friday. It is a Friday. Next Friday, I won't be on, most definitely. I'm going to be traveling to Texas, spending a little over a week visiting my mom and my brother. That'll be good. Haven't seen them in a couple years. Anyway, hope everything's going well. Your area, a little story to tell. So back a few years ago, when I was still teaching my on-the-road documentation course, I traveled throughout the whole United States, except for Alaska and Hawaii, and maybe a couple other states I didn't visit. But I pretty much visited all the, contiguous? Is that the correct word for it? United States. And once I was in Oklahoma. And two things I remember about Oklahoma: it's incredibly boring to drive through because it is flat. And two, it had a lot of clay. Like, if you looked at anybody coming off a dirt road, they would track clay for like a mile on the new road. It was insane how much clay there was. But I noticed one thing about Oklahoma is there was a lot of wind farms. Anyway, I spoke at a smaller city in Oklahoma, and the lady who helped organize getting me there, we got talking about stuff, and we talked about the wind farms. And she told me some interesting things. Number one, their area used to have certain weather patterns. And then the wind farms came in and those weather patterns changed. And we're talking huge wind farms, folks. We're talking hundreds and hundreds of turbines, the gigantic ones, the ones that are multiple stories high and have blades that are like 100 feet long. But these things stretch for miles. And in their area, they had noticed that the weather patterns had shifted dramatically. The other thing they had noticed is that there were a lot of cattle farmers in that area, and they had noted a significant drop in calving or births of calves since the wind farms came in. No other thing could be attributed to it. No diseases, nothing. So what they surmised is that the wind farms, being the only change that had occurred in the area, had impacted these two things: weather patterns and the cow birthing rate. So it got me thinking. I've been always a little skeptical of massive pushes for certain things. So massive pushes for wind power, for instance. When you look at some of the politics involved, it has to make you wonder. Did you know that if you are to set up a new drilling site for oil or natural gas or anything, you have to do an environmental impact report? There's a lot of things that go into getting to the point where you can actually drill for that substance. Whereas wind farms are environmentally exempt. So you don't have to prove that there's no negative net environmental impact from the turbines. Why? I don't know. Because it's assumed by many people that, this is entirely safe, no impact, free energy, no problems. But did you know, one, it takes a full year for a turbine. Well, it's estimated to take a single year, although this is going to depend on how much wind you've got in the area, but it may take longer for that thing to pay itself off. So first you have this full outlay of cash that's not cheap. Then you've got the raw materials. There's a massive amount of steel and plastics that go into these turbines. Also, each turbine, I just read this, uses 60 gallons of a very high grade type oil that has to be replaced every year in order to make it operate properly. And if you don't replace that oil, well, then you can have problems. So you get these very large wind farms. They may use thousands of this highly refined, very expensive oil per year. And there are people that need to keep up with that maintenance, companies that need to keep up with that maintenance. Otherwise, you can run into problems. I mean, think about it. You have this massive turning turbine. There's going to be a lot of friction in that unit. It needs to be mitigated with proper lubrication. If it's not, things break down. Think about the cost to your engine if you don't replace the oil and keep up on your oil changes. Engine components will break down and you could have catastrophic failure. Like your engine can literally blow chunks of metal if it's not kept up. If you could just have a catastrophic failure of your engine while driving down the road if you're running on old oil that's not been replaced or you run dry. Imagine that on a much, much larger scale with this huge turbine that sits 100 feet in the air or whatever the height is of these things deciding to die. And you've got maybe structures and people around that. You may have seen video, and you can find this online, of wind turbines failing. There's one famous one I saw. I think this comes from a few years ago, but the turbine failed during a windstorm. It wasn't even a tornado, but the thing just shredded to pieces. Like, it started to fail, and as soon as one component failed, because it became unbalanced, the other parts failed quickly, and you had massive chunks of blades just flying through the air long distances. And these things weigh a lot. They're huge if you've ever driven like close enough to look at one of these things. Birds, might as well throw that in there. They found that birds, their migratory patterns have been altered by wind turbines. You know, things that we're supposed to protect in nature, like birds' migratory flight paths, being altered by these massive wind farms. And also, they are known to cause problems with deaths of birds. It can be dangerous for birds. So let's go back to Oklahoma. And there was another town recently. I want to say it was Iowa. Anyway, it's in that area. They were going to have this wind farm be put up. Anyway, they're a minor news story, but they're going to have a wind farm put up. And they were offered by the company putting them up a 75-year lease on their land, all these farmers, to put up these wind farms. 75-year lease. You're giving up the rights to your land for 75 years. I'll be lucky if I live 75 years. That's your whole life for a lot of people. And they hadn't really investigated. They hadn't been really told anything other than that. You know, what they'd get paid. They want to put these farms in. And this one guy went out. He's anti-wind farm, and he's got a lot of stats about, you know, that use of that production, the energy production. And he gave them some ideas or questions to ask. Like, for instance, they are in Hurricane Alley. They're in the path, Tornado Alley. They're in the path of a high quantity of tornadoes. And so, you know, they were encouraged to ask these companies, like, so suppose a tornado comes along and shreds these massive propellers. Who cleans this up? Who pays for this? Who remunerates? Who reimburses people for losses? He didn't say this, but I'm thinking, who's liable? Like, suppose a blade lands on a house and kills a family in it. Who's liable in that particular case? Big truck pulling into the church parking lot where I'm at, making a very tight corner. Okay. Anyway, a little distraction. So who is responsible? Or like, let's say the oil, these 60 gallons of oil leak down it and into the ground. Who's responsible for the cleanup? And that is an environmental impact. There's a reason that environmental, you can't just dump your used oil on the ground. You have to have it properly disposed of. Who takes accountability for? So anyway, this guy brought to them all the questions they need to ask of this company, because the potential for a catastrophic failure causing a huge environmental, social, economic, personal impact on the area is big, just like any kind of energy source. You put in, let's say we were to put in a brand new nuclear station, which we haven't done in a long time, but we got up and running a new nuclear station. There's going to be an impact, and people need to know about that. Now, nuclear energy, with the regulations we have in place and the technology we have in place, is a very safe and very highly efficient energy source, and can produce more than enough energy if we were to put in more plants. But I digress. Oil rigs, obviously, risk for environmental impact. By the way, pipelines are much more efficient, effective, and safe than transporting oil on train lines. Yet Biden administration has cut down pipeline usage, and we've had to resort to trucks and trains, which puts the environmental impact at a much higher rate, potentially. So, and trains are much more gas efficient than using trucks. But I digress. So anyway, look into wind farms. I would check that out. And next time you see one as you're driving out in, the boonies, like we have some in the mountains of Virginia, ask yourself, one, are they really helping? And two, how are they possibly hurting us? Oh yeah, and they kind of ruin the view. I'm just saying. Anyway, John Adamson with Seeking Light. Take care. God bless.